Major funding for these programs is provided by grants from Capital One Bank and Perfect Building Maintenance, Murray Hill Properties, SJP Properties, Cushman and Wakefield, Greenberg Traurig, LLP, New York Community Bank, Bank of America, Kilroy Metal Products, New York's Window Company. Additional funding is provided by Akron Gold Brothers, LLC, Briarwood Organization, C.B. Richard Ellis, City Investment Fund, Essex Capital Partners, Excel Realty Advisors, First American Title Insurance Company of New York, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, GVA Williams, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, Herrick Feinstein, LLP, Helmsley Spear, Jackson Development Group, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, James Orphanides, John Katzimatidis, Massey Knackle Realty Services, Madison Realty Capital, Marcus and Millichap, M&T Bank, Meridian Capital Group, Newmark Knight Frank, Muss Development, Palin Enterprises, Rosenthal and Rosenthal, Signature Bank, Sterling and Sterling, Stephen Napolitano, Stonehenge Partners, Studley, the Moynihan Group.
Hello, my name is Michael Stoller. At one time, there was development taking place in New York City. There was cranes, there was all this construction. But what has happened is development for new projects has been halted. I mean, the economy, everything else is in shambles, so people are really scared. I've brought today together 4 leading developers, some of them who've been around for many, many years, who are going to give their perspective on what's happening with development in New York City. My guests today include Hal Fettner, President and CEO of Durst Fettner Residential, Ken Horn, Principal at Alchemy Properties, Peter Fine, co-founder and CEO of Atlantic Development Group, and last but not least, Vinny Rizzo, Principal of the Briarwood Organization. So since I was alluding that you've been around longer than the other guys over here, prior to the show, we were saying in your career of close to 55 years in the real estate business, how would you rate the real estate market today?
The current market is the most difficult and I'd say the worst that we've ever had to work with.
Why do you feel it's that bad?
The public is frightened to such an extent that attempting to have a sit down between a prospective purchaser and an end loan lender leaves the purchaser with a question in their minds: am I being lied to?
Ken, you have right now a couple of condo developments which are completed, where you're closing on the units. Would you agree with Vinny in this?
To a certain degree, yes. We were fortunate. In the last 120 days of 2008, we closed on 98 units in 2 of our buildings. We lost 1 apartment. 1 person walked away. I'd say the units that closed in September and October, the buyers had faith in the lenders. But as we got closer towards the end of December, the faith that the buyers had began to recede. Several times we've had appraisers come back 3 or 4 times. Lenders were probably a little bit delayed in terms of getting their buyers to the closing table. And as a sponsor and as a developer and seller, we had to work much more closely with the lenders than we ever have in the past. The other issue which came up is the level of closings within buildings. The guidelines of having a certain percentage of units sold to have buyers adhere to the bank standards, 35% with some banks, 51%. Mm-hmm. As a developer, now we had tier closings to accommodate the individual bank's needs. So to a certain degree, the smoothness of getting people closed is missing.
See, the interesting thing is you only develop condominiums. I mean, that's your business.
With the downside rental scenario
With
as well.
the downside rental scenario. How you develop rentals, 80-20s, but predominantly 80% market rate, 20% affordable. Peter, you develop mostly affordable apartments. You're building like 1,400 right now in the Bronx, and you're also building some 80-20s and market rate apartments in Manhattan.
Right.
On a rental situation. How do you see the rental market today, the residential rental market in New York City?
In terms of construction or?
In terms of renting, incentives, problems. We'll get to construction in a minute.
Well, I mean, our properties, we're clearly experiencing a downward push. In our portfolio, we have anywhere from this past few months, 8% to 11% decline in the rents. But at the same time, my vacancy rate is under 2%. Now, we take a philosophy in our organization that we're going to fill up that apartment, plain and simple.
So what do you have to do to fill up that apartment today?
Well, it's a number of factors. One is you have to be diligent and understand what the market is doing. So if I'm asking $4,200 for a two-bedroom and the market has now dropped to 36, and I'm holding it at 42, that apartment's going to remain vacant for at least 1 month, which is 8%. You know, very simply, if I leave it vacant for 1 month, that's an 8%. So,
well, what about incentives?
We're doing whatever we have to do. We're lowering the rent. In some cases, we're lowering the rent and offering a free month. In some cases, we're lowering the rent and offering the OP. We will do whatever needs to be done to lease up the apartment.
Peter, what are you seeing?
You know, we're managing about 5,000 to 6,000 units of housing which we own, which we've built over the last 11, 12 years, which are all subsidized to one degree or another. So, you know, rents are...
Yeah, but you have market rate on 60.
We have market rate too. My point is those units are not a problem for us, which is a great thing. So, you know, we were stupid when we built them because it wasn't necessarily the highest and best use of our time or capital, but now we're very smart.
So what is, you know...
It's a stable cash flow. Our market stuff in Manhattan, I'd say, started to drop probably at the beginning of the summer. And I'd say our leasing people approach me about once every month or two to drop the rents the last 8 months. And so we've probably dropped rents about 5 times. So the question, I think Hal's right. If you want to hold out, you're probably stupid, because we're in, as much as we were in an ascending market for a long time, for the last 5 to 10 years, we're in a descending market now.
So now let's look at it this way. As my friend, and Vinny knows him, Robert Levine, says, I'm a developer. I must develop. If there's not too much money around from banks, if there's any, and what are you doing? What does a developer do? What do you do? What do you do in this time? Besides asset management of your properties, what do you do? There are no more 421As, so there are no more tax abatements. You could do an 80-20, you know, 80% for my audience, and 20%. What do you do? So what are you doing? I mean, I don't want to say you're a deal junkie, but everybody is a deal junkie to a level.
Right. That's part of the definition of being a developer, is to be a deal junkie. What are we doing? We're looking for deals. All right. The unfortunate circumstances of this economy is actually going to create a lot of opportunity. And I actually think, I don't know when it's going to happen, but you're going to see unprecedented values. There is no debt out there right this moment. And what debt is out there is extremely expensive debt. So unfortunately, if I were to buy a piece of property or have a piece of property that's ready to be built as a rental right this moment, the debt takes me out of a rental scenario. Even with the depressed construction costs, the debt market is really not willing to basically come back into this market on anything other than their own terms.
Yeah, and this relates. So I know Peter recently got, over the last couple of months, some construction loans. You've had some construction loans. How difficult is it to get a construction loan? And have they changed the terms on you often?
I don't think the bank would put it that way.
Yeah.
I'm not asking which bank it is. I'm just asking. I'm asking the reality. You know, because
I think they would say the reality changed. No, we closed a lot of financing the last quarter of '08. We closed a loan for market rate rental in the city of about $65 million. I think it would have been $70 million if we would have closed a month or two earlier, so the leverage went down and the rate went up slightly, but we closed. And looking back, I think we were lucky that we closed. We closed the loan with a lender Thanksgiving. It was a pretty big deal. It was about a $130 million deal, all affordable housing. That lender effectively is out of business now. I mean, they're not out of business, but they're out of the lending business.
Which is what House did before.
Well, we closed, similar to these guys, we closed on a loan the end of August, and we took the leverage up to 65%. I mean, traditionally we would have taken up to maybe 75%. And at the closing, interestingly enough, your perspective, the spread did go up a little bit more from what the term sheet was at the closing table. The bank's perspective was that was the market. I mean, our perspective was you're not necessarily abiding by the term sheet, but the bottom line is we wanted to close on the loan, so we did. But I will agree with Hal. I think what's interesting is, I mean, we're developing 3 properties now. We're building them. I mean, when you're pregnant, you're pregnant. You go ahead and you build your sites. It seems counterintuitive when you've got your financing and you're building maybe 60, 70, 80% finished not to build it and to look at it either as a condominium or as a rental. But the opportunities will exist in the next 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 months. And the funds who traditionally act as equity...
It may take 2 years before the opportunities...
Well, I'm not sure that's true. I think what's happening now is that the funds who act as equity partners are beginning to think of dipping their toes in the water. I mean, a lot of the funds who've been working with is saying, Ken, have you seen any good deals? We didn't hear that 90 days ago, but we're hearing it now.
I ran a symposium last week, and I had equity funds, equity and mezz funds. And I asked them the question, how much money do you have? And my wife happened to be there, and she heard this term. I said, how much dry powder do you have? And she says, what's dry powder? I said, money available for investment. And they basically said they had $7 billion available. So I said, what are you doing with the money? And they said, we're doing nothing. Why are you doing nothing? Because we think values are going to drop more. So the question that you believe 2 to 3 months, really all of these, a group of 10. And then on the first panel, Mike Fascitelli of Vornado, who's sitting with $2.5 billion of cash in the bank, said, yes, I'm hoarding money. I am waiting for what Hal and you just said. It's going to be the best time. I'm not certain when the best time, but it's going to be the best time.
But when it's universally acknowledged that the bottom has been hit, that means it was hit well before people have acknowledged it.
Right.
It's not a science, it's an art. You know, so who knows? Who knows what the answer to that is?
Ken's 100% right. And one of the things that we're actually working on right now are what we call our rent curves, which is nothing more than sophisticated rent projections, because Durst Fettner, we don't expect to hit it exactly at the bottom, but we would rather hit it close to the bottom, even coming down, than on the up.
The question is, do we have an L? Do we have a U? I mean,
No.
This is what people have said. If it's an L, I'm worried. It's a U, I'm okay. I'll be okay on that. But you've been around. Do you think this is going to recover that quick?
I don't see it. Being in the audience at Mike's summit last week, it was very depressing to hear the comments of the panelists. We're going to close next week on a deal, and yes, the rates went up. The bank, of course, needs these things, and in this particular deal, which is an affordable deal, in one sense, we're putting up a 50% equity. It's not cash equity, but it comes out of the job. It's a very difficult situation, and it's affordable. But I think that in talking to other people, they're looking at 2010 the end of 2010, possibly 2011.
But that's the
before
timing that
turnaround.
works, because hypothetically, if you bought a site today, when you buy a site today, it's going to take you 10 months to 11 months to get your drawings done, get them approved by DOB, right? Bid out your job, and if you're lucky enough to either get a loan or do it all equity or do it with the assistance of an equity partner, your building's not going to be done until 2011, possibly early 2012. Now, of course, people don't necessarily look at it that way, but if you took the film and rewound it, then theoretically no one should have bought properties in 2006 or 2007 with the anticipation that in 2009 we were going to be in a horrible recession. So to a certain degree, if you are buying today, you're not buying for the next 3 months or 6 months. You're buying for the next 3 years.
There were people, we were talking before the show, who bought properties, who bought development sites at the height of the market, who started the construction, not you, who started this construction, who now cannot get enough money if they make it even as a rental fallback to work out. I mean, we have difficulties over there. And what happened was, when they abandoned the 421As, killed that, we've hurt the market. And we were talking just before, what about this this potential change in the rental rules that the assemblies did?
Well, that's devastating. I mean,
Why don't you explain that to my audience? I mean, because it's important.
Well, you know what? I mean, look, we don't have enough time to explain why. I mean, there are so many issues. I mean, we can talk about the proposed MCI increase or changes where...
No, I'm talking more about the specific fact that they want to put more units back into stabilization, and, you were saying...
Michael, but you got to read it. I mean, as I said to you earlier, I was just finished reading it before I came here, and just take, for an example, the MCI, where right now you recoup 1/40th of your expense. Okay? But then at that point, the rent remains level. The new legislation wants to roll the rent back. So I guess the question for me would be, where's the economic incentive for me to want to improve one of my buildings if I'm only going to recoup the cost of the improvement but not get an increase in my rent? So I don't think that promotes affordable housing. That just the opposite. For somebody who might not be as strong as Der Svetner, who's living from the rent from those buildings, they can't afford to put the money into a 5-story walk-up, renovate it, and not get a fair return.
I'll give you worse. The lenders who were providing the money for the 5-story walk-up were providing the money on the rent increases, as we know on a number of properties like the Rivington, like Delano, and some others, which are not going to be there.
Wow.
I mean, Steve Witkoff on a show a couple of weeks ago was sitting next to Steve Siegel, and Siegel says, I own all these properties in the Bronx, people are going to live there. And Witkoff said, bullshit. Because what's really going to happen is that there's a circumstance, people who are unemployed, who can't afford it, are going to look for other apartments. They're going to go out to Queens. They're going to go out to other neighborhoods, or they're going to move into their families like this.
I can't imagine Jerry Spire is very happy with the news of what's going on with the new rent.
So getting back to my point, when do you see developments? You're all developers. You all make a living by developing. You don't make a living. You can live comfortably, on your rental flow, but you need, especially you're a junkie. I mean, you tell me you only
hardly.
You're a junkie because you only do condos. Okay, they live with rentals. Okay,
we have about 400 rentals. So that's helpful.
So what I'm saying is, what happens? Where is land prices today? What's happening with that? Because have sellers become, are they still in denial of what prices should be for land? Because you were saying you can't build.
I think it would be very, very difficult to build a new rental today. Not because prices haven't come down and construction costs haven't come down. They have, and they probably will fall more. But it's very, very hard to gauge where to underwrite a deal today, because even if we're going to complete in 2 years, we don't know, as you say, if this is going to, we're going to continue to have rents drop for, let's say, 6 months. If we're lucky, it's only 6 months. But if it stays there for a year or two, well, then we're coming out in 2 years and we're flat. And it's very hard to gauge where the market is today, and that's why there's this paralysis, I think, both for the public in terms of renting or buying something, and for banks and developers. This time, I started out in real estate in the early 90s. I'm like the youngest guy here, I guess, in real estate years. And this time reminds me a little bit of those days where it was just, there was a dark cloud. And, I think we're all going to do things. Everybody here is very prudent, is not going to force anything. I'm sure we're all going to do deals. We're just not going to do as many deals as maybe we did 3 years ago.
Now, the interesting thing, Vinny, you have an affordable condo deal in Arverne.
Right.
And you have an affordable co-op deal in the Bronx.
Correct.
So tell my audience what those deals are, because Peter does all these affordable rentals. But what's the difference on these deals?
Well,
who's buying? Are these people buying?
These are home ownership deals, both of them, and of course the range of incomes is based on the area median incomes, and we go anywhere from 60% of AMI up to 165%.
So what's the price of a unit? I'm trying to,
The price of a unit typically would be $250,000 for a 3-bedroom and $140,000 for a 2-bedroom.
Now, are these people who are? It's lottery.
It's a lottery.
It's all lottery. Are these people being fortunate to get mortgages? That's the real question. You can be offering a reasonable price. It's a great opportunity of home ownership at $100,000 to $250,000 for someone. But the big question is the affordability. Because I remember up in the Bronx, ARIA property investors bought these 2 buildings, and they are trying to convert one to co-op, and the people aren't qualifying for the mortgages.
Well, what's happening with those are the full price of the units. From those full prices are deducted the subsidies that come with those units. The Affordable Housing Corporation, AHC subsidies, city subsidies, and so forth, so that the value that the appraiser puts on these units are much more than the actual price paid by the homeowner.
So since the appraisal is higher, it's easy for the person to get a mortgage.
Yes.
Is what you're saying on that? How you were talking about you built 31st Street a couple years ago, and then you and your partner Douglas have the Helena, and there are others. You're looking at sites. What do you see about the sites? Well, what's available?
What's available? As Peter and I were talking about before the show, what we're seeing available right now, more times than not, are families that have owned a piece of property who either lost the market in that they should have sold a year ago and haven't, and have now decided, well, I'm not going to get $400 or $500 a foot, so you know what? I still want to develop this property. It's still ready to go, and the only way they're going to maximize their value today would be to partner up with a developer, and we're seeing a lot of that.
Which I think you were talking about
That's
before
exactly.
also. This, we were talking about that, a property that you lost a couple of years ago up in Harlem. But that's a big item today. A lot of people...
We're seeing people approaching us now, either lenders or mezz people or inexperienced developers who are saying, I'm stuck. And they know our niches, our buildings between, say, 60,000 and 120,000 feet. And these people got involved in development, and maybe they went in all equity. Maybe they didn't have a loan, and they were hoping that the winds would remain as strong as they were 2 years ago, and they'd be able to get a loan, but they can't.
Well, in good times, everybody wants to be a developer.
That's right.
And
it's like I want to be a producer.
When it shakes out, those that are not developers,
And he did.
and those that have a lot of cash in a property are looking for a joint venture with a developer that can maximize their return. Basically, if you did it that way, the way we approach it is, we attach a number to the property. We work backwards, and then we give the landowner a piece of the profits, so they can somewhat approach their original thinking as to the value of the property.
Aren't you trying to do something like that with some of your development sites?
Absolutely.
I mean, because this is this could be a win-win on both sides, because the landowner who's had the property, who's really inexperienced, who doesn't have the expertise to do it, you're able to do something on that situation.
Well, you look at who's sitting right here. You've assembled a very esteemed panel. We try to leverage off
That's
of our
why
name.
I brought this group together.
That's it. Well, we try to leverage off of our name and the Durst name and the fact that we've done things, we do things the right way. And when we sit down with a family, they know who we are. They know that we've never defaulted on loans. They know that we build a first-class product. And we tell them point blank, you know what? We're going to pay you this much for your property. We're going to give you a piece of the action, but I'm going to get my money out first. And so if I'm going to take the construction risk and I'm going to take the lease-up risk, then I'm entitled to a fair return before you start getting, your money back. And more times than not, the people understand, and you can make a fair deal. Especially if this person saw at one point they could sell their property for $400, $500 a foot, and now
they have nothing.
The best offer they've gotten is $175 to $200 a foot. They want to partner up with a reputable firm.
That's the whole point. They're marrying you, and they have to trust you. They have to look into your background, and they have to make sure that all the benefits that you say that your firm provides, they're going to get.
And that's why the four of you have been assembled, as opposed to bringing the inexperienced person who says, I want to be a developer. And unfortunately, in the heyday of 2006, 7, and 8, that's what we had. We had a lot of people who wanted to be a developer.
I recently had 3 young guys come to my office who had bought a site, a 25,000 square foot site. There were 3 people who had no experience whatsoever, 0. They got their families to put all the money together. They bought the site, and they said, well, what do? Do we hire an architect? Do we only hire an engineer? Do we hire a structural engineer? Do we hire a mechanical engineer? And then I felt badly for them, so they came to my office. I sat with them for about an hour. Then I realized that they were calling me every day. And I said, guys, look, I'll help you out here.
With regard to that, our 30 minutes are over. I really would like to thank Hal Fettner, Ken Horn, Peter Fine, and Vinny Rizzo. Next week, we have an interesting show talking about the office market. See you next week.
Major funding for these programs is provided by grants from Capital One Bank and Perfect Building Maintenance, Murray Hill Properties, SJP Properties, Cushman & Wakefield, Greenberg Traurig, LLP, New York Community Bank, Bank of America, Kilroy Metal Products, New York's Window Company. Additional funding is provided by Akron Gold Brothers, LLC, Briarwood Organization, C.B. Richard Ellis, City Investment Fund, Essex Capital Partners, Excel Realty Advisors, First American Title Insurance Company of New York, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, GVA Williams, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, Herrick Feinstein, LLP, Helmsley Spear, Jackson Development Group, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, James Orphanides, John Katzimatidis, Massey Knackle Realty Services, Madison Realty Capital, Marcus and Millichap, M&T Bank, Meridian Capital Group, Newmark Knight Frank, Muss Development, Palin Enterprises, Rosenthal and Rosenthal, Signature Bank, Sterling and Sterling, Stephen Napolitano, Stonehenge Partners, Studley, the Moynihan Group.